It was a calm evening, the kind that feels ordinary but later turns meaningful. I was sitting alone in my room, watching television after a long day. The volume was low, and the room was softly lit. It was my usual way to relax, letting my thoughts slow down after hours of responsibilities and routine. Our house was peaceful that night. Being part of a blended family meant shared spaces and shared respect. My stepbrother had been part of our family for years. We were both adults, living under the same roof for convenience and family reasons. Our interactions had always been polite, brief, and normal, just like any other household members. At that time in my life, I was dealing with emotional distance in my own relationship. Nothing dramatic had happened, but long work hours, stress, and lack of communication had created quiet gaps. I did not feel unloved, but I did feel unheard. I never spoke much about it, choosing instead to stay strong and silent. As I sat watching TV, there was a soft knock on my door. My stepbrother entered after asking politely. He needed to ask something simple, something ordinary. We exchanged a few casual words. There was nothing unusual about it, yet the conversation lasted longer than expected. We talked about everyday things: family, work, memories from earlier years. The tone was calm and respectful. What surprised me was how easy it felt to talk. There was no pressure, no judgment, just listening. It reminded me how comforting simple understanding can be. As the conversation ended, I felt a strange awareness. Nothing inappropriate had happened, but something had shifted emotionally. I noticed it and reminded myself to stay grounded. Still, that night stayed in my thoughts longer than it should have. In the days that followed, I caught myself thinking about that conversation. It made me uncomfortable, not because it was wrong, but because it made me realize how emotionally vulnerable I had become. I understood that emotional closeness, even without intent, can quietly cross invisible lines. Our interactions remained normal: a greeting in the hallway, a short conversation during meals. Nothing personal, nothing private. Yet I noticed how my mind reacted. I felt more open than I should have been, and that awareness created guilt. I started reflecting on my own responsibilities. Emotional infidelity does not begin with actions, it begins with misplaced attention. I realized that leaning emotionally on someone outside my relationship, even unintentionally, was unfair to my partner. That realization was difficult to accept. It meant admitting that I had allowed an emotional gap to grow instead of addressing it honestly. I felt conflicted but also grateful for the awareness before things went any further. I created emotional distance intentionally. I focused on my routine, avoided unnecessary conversations, and spent more time reflecting. The silence helped me think clearly. I understood that feelings are not mistakes, but choices matter. By acknowledging the situation early, I gave myself a chance to do the right thing. That decision would shape everything that follows. One evening, I decided clarity was necessary. I spoke with my stepbrother calmly and respectfully. I explained that while nothing inappropriate had happened, emotional boundaries were important, and I wanted to maintain them properly. He listened carefully and responded maturely. He admitted he had also sensed emotional closeness and agreed that clear boundaries were necessary. There was no blame, no discomfort, only mutual respect. That conversation brought relief. Sometimes addressing a situation directly prevents future misunderstandings. We returned to normal family interactions, keeping conversations light and appropriate. The more difficult step was facing my own relationship. I chose honesty. I spoke to my partner about my emotional distance and admitted my mistake in not communicating sooner. I did not justify anything. I took responsibility. The conversation was painful but necessary. Trust had been shaken, but honesty opened the door to healing. We discussed emotional needs, expectations, and how neglect can slowly affect relationships. That moment taught me that honesty, even when uncomfortable, is always the right path. Time brought clarity and healing. Boundaries remained strong, and household life returned to balance. More importantly, my relationship began to improve through effort, communication, and understanding. I learned that emotional awareness is just as important as loyalty. Temptation does not always appear as something obvious. Sometimes it appears as comfort at the wrong time. This experience taught me to speak up, to address emotional needs before silence turns into distance. It reminded me that integrity is about choices, not perfection. Looking back, that quiet night became a lesson in responsibility and growth. Nothing dramatic happened, yet the impact was meaningful. The story I shared today is not about wrongdoing, but about awareness. Emotional boundaries protect relationships, and honesty protects the heart. Sometimes, the smallest moments teach the biggest lessons.